Many of Minecraft's biomes are peppered with structures to explore and loot. Oceans have shipwrecks, dark forests have woodland mansions, and villages appear all over. But the existence of both desert and jungle temples leaves some biomes feeling left out. I'm going to add custom plains temples, using unique mechanics and custom items to bring them to life among the pantheon of Minecraft structures. Let's start by taking a look at the existing temples and some other structures to see how I can adapt their design into my own philosophy for this plains temple. The desert temple isn't a small structure, I would say, but it isn't enormous either. It does look pretty nice and imposing, one of the largest structures that you'll see on the surface of the Minecraft overworld, and it has a pretty robust interior with this central chamber, obviously this upper section up here that you can get to from the towers on the side, as well as the secret basement down here, where the actual loot as well as danger is. I don't want to go much larger than this. Ideally, I would like my Plains Temple to be a fairly medium-sized structure on the surface of Plains biomes. Where the Desert Temple is essentially the same every time that it spawns, the Jungle Temple does have just a little bit of variety to it. This upper section remains entirely the same, but as you go down into the basement of the structure where the core of the content is, it'll be flipped sometimes between the levers on the left side or the right side, and the actual hallway with the dispenser traps on the opposite side. This is probably the most variation that Mojang would have been able to implement at the time these structures were added, before jigsaw blocks, even internally, were very robust. However, now that we have jigsaw blocks and just generally more powerful JSON files to spawn structures with, we can do a lot more than this without needing a completely separate structure for both potential varieties. One thing that I like about both the desert and jungle temples is that even though they are dark and so mobs can spawn in them, they aren't an explicit combat challenge like the trial chambers here are. While players travel to trial chambers to fight monsters in replayable, unique environments to get consistent loot, the temples are more about exploration and feature either basic puzzles and/or some simple traps. I want to maintain this prioritization for my Plains Temple. Monsters might be able to spawn there, but they are not the reason that players will be traveling to the structure. Additionally, while jungle temples have remained relatively unchanged since their addition, desert temples actually did get a small update recently with archaeology. They have some suspicious sand that can generate in them, similar to the trail ruins and their suspicious gravel. I'm not going to go quite as extreme on the suspicious blocks, but I do plan to add some to my Plains Temple to add just a little bit of extra exploration and loot. Something else I'm going to be borrowing from the trail ruins and from archaeology in general is the concept of having another item be required to be brought by the player in order to fully experience and engage with the structure. If you find a trail ruin, you can dig it out and potentially gather and collect all these blocks that might be hard to acquire in large quantities, or even try to restore the structure yourself. But if you don't have an archaeology brush, you're not going to be able to fully experience the structure as intended and gather all the loot from the suspicious gravel. You'll end up breaking it all. So although my Plains Temple will also have archaeology, I want to incorporate a mechanic that is unique to it, that requires the player to craft and bring a custom item of their own in order to fully engage with the structure. Now that we have an idea of what goals we want this Plains Temple to be able to achieve, let's get into a build world and start putting together a basic structure. Rather than building a couple of basic pieces and explaining how I intend for them to fit together, I thought that since this is a surface structure, it would make more sense to start by building the actual structure as I hope it to come together, and then we can break it apart into the respective pieces, which will help us understand how we want that variety to come into play. Taking some inspiration from other video games like the Legend of Zelda series, we have a large central tower that will serve as the entry into the temple, as well as two smaller towers that might feature some other loot or challenges or something. There will be some kind of a central entry room down here under this roof, and then we have the main chapel proper, where the bulk of the experience is likely to take place. I'm thinking we'll have a variable kind of altar or dais here on the floor here, and then on the back kind of platform back here, we might have a variable statue that appears here. But before we can start planning features like that, I need to split this structure up into its quintessential separate pieces. Ideally, I think it'd be great if the room of the chapel could be a separate piece from each of the respective walls, this back section, and even the roof if I can, so that I can make each of those pieces have different groups of variations that all get fitted together to create one cohesive looking structure. So I'm going to figure out how to cut this up so that we can make sure it can be put back together again. So now we have the base structure over here, kind of just as a blueprint of how the final structure should come together, but then we have all of the respective pieces off on this side. I've split it up into the central tower here, which also happens to include most of this kind of front middle room that will be between the entry tower and the chapel. We have the left and right towers, as well as the chapel room itself, which I was able to separate from the wall pieces over here. I've made the wall pieces just a little bit larger than they need to be to support the actual structure as it is, because I plan to add varieties that are a little bit wider, either to expand the main chapel room or just to add a little bit of extra stuff kind of outside of the chapel, outside of the windows here. We have the back section separated out here, and then the roof structure over here, which covers the entire main chapel room as well as the back section. Now, the first thing you might notice is that all of these structures already have several jigsaw blocks placed inside of them. This is so that I can plan where and what kind of pieces I want to use to both populate each of the respective pieces, as well as where all of these base pieces are ultimately going to connect to one another. So all of these jigsaw blocks in and on the floor of this chapel room right here don't do anything yet, but this jigsaw block right here is going to connect and generate from the jigsaw block at the back of this entry tower right here. The entry tower generates first, and then this jigsaw block generates that chapel. These ones on either side generate the two left and right towers, and then the chapel generates the left and right walls, as well as the roof and the rear section. That's the idea anyway. We'll make sure that works as intended in just a moment. The other thing you might notice is these floating extra roof pieces above the roof structure as well as each of the towers. When the structure generates, I'm going to have a processor apply to all the pieces to apply just a little bit of random variation to the blocks. So, for example, a lot of the stone bricks are going to get replaced with cracked stone bricks and mossy stone bricks, just like you might expect exploring a stronghold. Technically, I could do the same thing for the roofs to have a random assortment of the brick stairs and slabs that the roofs are made of be replaced with polished granite stairs and slabs, so that we get just a little bit nicer texturing for these roof pieces. However, the way that processors work would require me to list every possible block state for each of those stairs and slabs, and stairs in particular can have quite a lot. So it just makes more sense and is frankly way easier for me to use what's called a list pool element type in the template pool that's going to generate these pieces. So for example, when this entry tower gets placed, on top of that, this entry tower overlay structure is going to get placed, but as it does so, I'm going to replace a random assortment of the polished granite blocks that are made up of it with air. So when it gets overlaid on top of these brick block pieces, some of the brick is going to stay and some of it will get replaced with the granite here. That sounds really complicated, but trust me, it is way easier than trying to write out all of the different block states that I would need to for the brick stairs and slabs to get potentially replaced with the appropriate matching block state of polished granite block. Let's save all of these structure pieces, make those template pools and processor list files, and head into another flat world so we can make sure it all comes together like this. Okay, and at a glance, I think this looks correct. Doesn't seem like there's any gaps between the various structure pieces where a jigsaw block got offset by one block one way or the other, and I don't see any missing pieces off the bat either. We've got the entry tower, both of the side towers, roof, and the wall pieces, and it looks like the chapel probably generated right too, because these pillars are part of that chapel room piece. There's obviously nothing inside of here yet because all those jigsaw blocks that are in the floor of the chapel room and so on don't have any pieces they can actually generate. But so far, I'm really liking how this has turned out. We've got the processor working very well, so some of the stone bricks are getting replaced with not only the cracked and mossy stone brick, but also these polished andesite blocks, which I think adds some really nice texturing. The brick and polished granite is combining correctly with the overlay structure piece. And some of the stone that I'm using behind these pillars is also getting replaced with cobblestone or mossy cobblestone, again, just to add a little bit of extra texturing to those blocks. Especially works really well given they are mostly obscured. I do have some chests up here in the top of each of these towers, as well as a bell at the top of the central tower, which you can get up to with some ladders. The chests don't have any loot yet. We'll figure out what we want to fill them with based on the puzzle and items that we create to engage with this temple. I do specifically want the floor of the temple to be grass blocks. For one, I think that just adds that better connection with the plains, since this is the plains temple, but also will help make it feel properly overgrown and abandoned beyond just the general structure being in disrepair. And of course, we'll improve that feeling of disrepair as we add more structure variants to each of these pieces. Before that though, let's get some filler pieces in the chapel and probably even out here in the kind of central room and the side towers as well. And currently all of these windows are empty. I definitely want to design some like stained glass windows to fill these. So here are the structures I've put together for those filler pieces. You'll notice that they all have some jigsaw blocks inside of them where they can connect to the jigsaw blocks from those previous structure pieces. We have a very subtle creeper face option, one that looks like a very skinny nether portal, and of course just a basic frosted glass option. That'll probably be the most common. I didn't notice when I was building, but these windowsills that are part of the chapel walls are actually 1 block taller than the windowsills that appear in the entry and side towers here. So I made some separate window fillers for those, and I've gone with a very different kind of idea than the stained glass windows that I'm using for the chapel, since I figured these would be kind of much more front facing. They're part of the proper facade of the temple. So we have just a basic glass window, one that I'm using spruce shelves for to make look like it's all boarded up, as well as one that looks like there's some iron bars kind of blocking it in. So from the front, the temple might look much more kind of abandoned and ruined and blocked off than the stained glass windows might imply out in the chapel. I also made a couple of options for tables to fill both the entry towers area as well as the rear section here of the chapel, as if maybe like a priest or something would be placing things or gathering things from it during whatever ceremonies they held here. And speaking of ceremonies, we also have several options for altars. These two might look identical, but the jigsaw block in this one is going to get replaced by water instead of a polished diorite block like this one will. For the actual filler inside of the chapel, where the bulk of the space is going to be, I have a couple of options in the form of some pews with some gravel for the floors here, as well as a patch of gravel right here. Both of these are going to have processors applied so that there can be some suspicious gravel mixed in, which will have some loot that will again determine based on the puzzle and custom item that we create for the structure. The stage at the rear is going to have a chance for one of the statues back here. We've got this kind of angelic figure here that I'm using this shelf to create sort of a face for, though I'll admit it's kind of creepy. And then this one that I'm actually really proud of, it's kind of meant to look like a kneeling hero. I think you can kind of get the idea. The head is a little bit silly, but I really like how I handled the sword here that he's kind of holding into the ground using some block states that normally wouldn't be able to get in survival for this brick wall without any adjoining pieces to look kind of like the handle for a sword. Returning to the chapel room, this is where most of those structures are going to appear. So all of these jigsaw blocks that are facing to the side are going to have a chance to generate either those pews, the gravel patch, or the stage, the pulpit thing, where all of these jigsaw blocks that are facing up are going to have a chance to generate a statue. Only one such structure is going to be able to generate in any given 5x5 space, and it's going to be random which one. The reason for that is because a jigsaw block cannot generate a jigsaw piece, a structure piece, where a previous structure piece has already generated, or intersecting a previous structure piece. So for example, if this jigsaw block happens to get selected to generate its piece first, it's going to have a chance to generate a statue, and if it succeeds, then this space is already occupied. So then this jigsaw block is going to be selected next and attempt to generate its own piece, but it would be intersecting a previously generated piece of the structure, and so it'll simply fail. This will allow for a lot of variety in the layout of these chapel rooms. Sometimes you might have a chance to get 6 whole statues filling it up, and sometimes you might just get a whole bunch of pews. Sometimes you might get none. This piece right here is going to generate the dais, and then, like I said, this piece will generate that rear section back here, where we'll have a guaranteed chance for a statue. We also have some jigsaw blocks for the tables here, and similarly, there will be some jigsaw blocks for those tables back here in these side towers and the entry tower. Obviously, all these jigsaw blocks that are in the windowsills are going to attempt to generate those respective types of windows. Lastly, I do have a chance for statues to generate outside of the chapel walls, but these jigsaw blocks aren't going to generate anything right now. We'll have to come up with some other filler to have generate outside here that fits a little bit better than just pews and things. Now, before we see how all of these pieces end up looking and generating in the structure, I want to come up with that actual puzzle, that unique experience that players are going to need to bring a custom item to engage with the structure fully with. And I'd really like it to play a very key role with the altar or dais that generates in the chapel. I've got some ideas on the drawing board, so I'll come back to you when I have something fleshed out. Say hello to the focusing mirror. This is a custom block that the player can craft and place down anywhere they could place a flower pot. It'll always start facing the same direction, just like an item frame, but also like an item frame, you can right-click it to rotate it in one of 8 directions. If you want to move it, you can simply left-click it and it'll break and drop as an item once again. First and foremost, focusing mirrors make for a great decorative block. You can place them down and use them anywhere you would like, a little table mirror, and you can use carpet on them to decorate them in one of 16 varieties. Doing so in survival mode will consume the carpet, and you can use shears to remove that, but you won't get the carpet back. I thought adding the decoration would be fun, but obviously that isn't the main purpose that players are going to be crafting focusing mirrors for. The item is of course called a focusing mirror, so the question becomes, what are they focusing? Well, during roughly the middle of the day, in the space where the chapel's altar or dais is going to be, you'll see this ray of light shine down from the sky. It won't appear in the mornings or evenings or at night, and as you get closer and closer to noon, the ray of light will become more and more intense and draw your attention to that central block on the altar. When you place a focusing mirror in that spot, it will redirect that light in a single beam up to, I believe, 48 blocks away. And you can, of course, still rotate the mirror to change the direction that that beam will go. You can then line up another focusing mirror in that spot to redirect the beam once again around a corner or some other structure that might be in your way. But of course, if you hit a solid block, that beam of light is going to stop. This is being done using a raycast. Basically, the marker that is generating the ray of light is checking if there's a focusing mirror nearby, and if there is, it starts a raycast, a repeated sequence, a loop of steps that get one step closer and closer, or rather further and further, along a particular direction, the direction that the focusing mirror is facing. If it encounters another focusing mirror, then it continues that raycast in that new direction, and so on and so forth. And don't worry developers, as you can see, I've made it so that this raycast is not recursive if you do end up putting it into a loop. If you make a focusing mirror redirect the ray of light into another focusing mirror that is already part of that ray, then it simply stops. Let's head back into our test world to test both the generation of our filler pieces as well as the ray of light and focusing mirror behavior in an actually generated structure. By the way, if you're enjoying the video, please remember to like and subscribe for more custom structures, world gen, and data pack content. If you'd like to learn more about making custom structures yourself, check the link in the description for my very thorough written guide that I've made for Data Pack Hub, where I am an official helper. If you're excited to explore the Plains Temple yourself, please consider joining my Patreon for early access. As I continue to update the pack and potentially add more biome temples, I hope to release this to the public in the future, but for now, my wizard tier patrons and higher will provide valuable playtesting. Alright, so first up, the facade is looking pretty good. We have clearly several of these boarded up windows combined with the regular glass windows that are generating there, and even this checkerboard pattern here. And that continues all the way around the sides of these tower structures. But then, as we get over into the chapel, clearly this side got all frosted glass. We'll need to double check the weight there and make sure that it's not too common. But thankfully we do have some of the other stained glass designs on the other side as well as the back here. We're getting our statues outside for sure, and I can even see some pews inside, so we know that's all working well. And I've made it so that the statues can rotate randomly, so that sometimes the angel statue will be looking inside the window, sometimes it'll be facing out like this Triforce one here. Let's go ahead and enter the temple through the front as intended and see how things look. So we do get a statue here in this front room as well. Looks like we're getting some tables. We've got one over here, none inside of this tower, and it doesn't look like there's any over here. Oh, we do have one with the lectern there. Great. But again, none in this tower. We do have the ladders up to the top, but that's just where the chests are. We can enter into the chapel proper to again see those pews. We have a couple of areas here where neither a statue nor a chapel filler ended up generating, and I think that's totally fine. We do have this statue here in the middle, and of course our ray of light is generating perfectly on top of this altar. We can go ahead and place our focusing mirror down, make sure that's working correctly. Great. And we can even make sure that we're able to place focusing mirrors at different heights as well. So we could have this focusing mirror even go and point directly into the face of this angel statue. But if we go ahead and set the time to something like 4,000 outside of the near noon time that the ray of light is able to appear, it disappears, and placing a focusing mirror does nothing. It does not create any new ray of light because we are outside of that period of time that it's active. I really like this because it means not only do you need to bring some focusing mirrors with you if you intend to explore a Plains temple, but it does time block your experience there. So you need to make a point of traveling in the middle of the day if you want to take full advantage of however we end up making these focusing mirrors interact with the structure. Now, if you're wondering, you can craft a focusing mirror pretty cheaply, just 4 of any planks blocks, 2 gold ingots, and a piece of glass. Not terribly expensive at all, but you will need at least iron or some kind of gold source in order to get it. Now, although the focusing mirror is going to be used for some kind of a light redirection puzzle here in the Plains Temple, I do want it to be just a little bit more than simply a decorative block outside of the Plains Temple, should the player decide to use it around their own base. So I've made it so that if you right-click a focusing mirror with certain blocks, instead of rotating it, you'll actually start to wear that block on your head in a way that you normally wouldn't be able to in survival. This is the case for most chiseled blocks, all of the solid ore blocks, as well as the stained glass blocks. Several of the various blocks that you would expect have kind of a face-like look on them, like furnaces and crafters. And I've also included bedrock just for fun, should an admin or something happen to acquire some and want to wear it. And yes, you can use a focusing mirror to wear another focusing mirror. In survival mode, it'll of course consume the block, and as you noticed, I made it so that when you do right-click while you're already wearing something on your head, the item you were already wearing gets dropped for you to grab again. Our structure is getting more and more varied, and we have the focusing mirror and ray of light as the core of the puzzle, but we obviously don't have anything to do with them yet. So let's start adding some variants for things like the wall and chapel pieces, as well as something for the focusing mirrors and the ray of light to actually interact with to produce some kind of reward. This is the ancient aperture block. It is on all sides just a chiseled stone brick block, except for this front face where it has this nice copper ring and a bit of a glass window here, hopefully as a kind of a clue that this is where you will redirect the ray of light into using focusing mirrors. I've built these 2 pieces that we can use to generate some ancient apertures in the walls of the structure, primarily probably in those towers there, and then I've also incorporated ancient apertures into some of our existing structure pieces, namely in various parts and levels of the statues, as well as back here on this sort of pulpit or stage structure. I'm going to make it so that this jigsaw block here on the rear stage of the chapel is always going to generate a statue and always generate it facing inside of the chapel, so that there's always an easy ancient aperture to redirect a ray of light into so that you can learn the mechanic. Then all of the other ancient apertures that generate as part of the filler pieces or statues, both inside and out, will be rotated in various directions so that you have to use several focusing mirrors in order to unlock them. In addition to the basic chapel variant, I've also added a pool chapel variant, which obviously has this shallow pool of water here, where a dais will still generate where the ray of light is. It obviously isn't centered in the pool is a little bit lopsided, and that's so that I could have space to have some of the filler or statues in the corners here without overlapping the lip of the pool with these stair blocks. Oh, looks like I missed some water. Whoops. Just fill those up real quick. I've also designed several variants for the walls. This first one is a graveyard, which is going to have these jigsaw blocks out here, able to generate some graves. This one will face away from these doors that take up one of the stained glass windowsills on the chapel side. I do think I'm going to make it so that graves can also generate from these jigsaw blocks in the regular wall variant, and indeed all the other variants I'll show you in a moment, but the graveyard is going to be specifically designed for them. We've also got a variant with arches, again both to the left and right side, as well as this variant that expands the chapel to create a bit of a larger room, though still with some support pillars kind of down the middle to combine with the support pillars that are in the chapel room variants. These, of course, also have overlay structures so that we can replace some of the brick, stairs, and primarily slabs with the polished variants. Obviously, it'd be much easier since these are mostly slabs to replace them with processors, but the stairs would still be inconvenient because we would still need the 4 block states for all the various rotations that each of these can appear at. So just handling it the same way as the other roof pieces is totally fine. These are those grave structures that I mentioned will populate outside of the temple and specifically outside the chapel. We've got 3 very basic graves, a little bit of a fancier grave, and then a super fancy grave that is going to have a chest with, again, some loot buried under it in sort of a nice looking coffin underneath the dirt if you do decide to exhume it. These 2 fancier variants also have ancient apertures, as you can see, and I'm going to use a processor to replace some of the coarse dirt in all 3 of these with a chance for suspicious gravel in very much a similar way that I'm handling the suspicious gravel in these pieces. Those wall ancient apertures are going to have a chance to appear on either the front or back side of each of these side towers in 2 different spots here. They won't always generate here, but when they do, it'll be random which side of the wall they generate on. So sometimes you might need to break through from the chapel across the courtyard and into one of these side towers here where you have very limited space in order to get the focusing mirror lined up just right to unlock that ancient aperture. Let's head into a test world, make sure all of these structure variant pieces are generating, and try out redirecting a ray of light into an ancient aperture. So first off, as you can see, we've gotten a graveyard for both the right wall as well as the left wall here. Ordinarily, this would be pretty uncommon for a template pool to be able to generate, but I've actually made the wall pieces handled a little bit differently than something like the rear or roof piece. I'm using what's called a pool alias in the structure's JSON file that handles how it actually generates in order to sometimes replace the jigsaw blocks that place the wall pieces to only place, for example, the graveyard wall pieces instead of the regular or arch wall pieces. Similarly, there's a separate pool variant that makes those jigsaw blocks only place the expansion pieces to make the chapel room wider. This is both so that when those wall pieces do happen to get selected, they don't make the structure feel kind of lopsided. Like it would feel kind of weird if this one was an expansion or a graveyard like this, and then the other side was just a regular wall. I feel like that would be really strange. So this way, both sides will always be the same, at least from among those 3 groups, either graveyard, expansion, or wall/arches. We can go ahead and place another temple here to see that this time we got arches on the outside. Again, for both sides, we happen to get lucky here. This one does have a chance to have a regular wall on one side and arches on the other, and I think that's fine. But we still got those graves or statues for some of them down here on the outside, whereas in the graveyard, we only get graves. So let's once again enter through the front entrance. Looks like we're getting way more tables here, and I've actually added some table variants, like one that has an ancient aperture inside of it. There's another one that we can see through here that has a focusing mirror on it, and it actually has a chance to have any of the 17 variants of focusing mirror. Entering into the chapel proper, looks like we got a pool chapel variant this time, and in this one, the ray of light actually lines up with the tower above that instead of this hole in the roof that I've placed for the main chapel variant. I think that's totally fine. The ray of light is magical, doesn't necessarily need to be coming through the ceiling in a natural hole. The main thing I want is for some natural light to be projecting through and lighting up this room. Let's go ahead and test this ancient aperture. So we can go ahead and build up some scaffolding to, I think roughly here actually. Place a focusing mirror. We can redirect that into the ancient aperture. It's going to drop at least 4 loot items from a loot table and has a chance for some more based on some random chance. Looks like this time we just got 15 leather and 2 pumpkins. Not too terrible, but definitely could get better. We happen to have another one lined up pretty closely here, so we can go ahead and build this up a little bit more, go directly in there, and this time we happen to get some iron and gold as well. Not a whole lot. You're not going to get super great loot out of here. We obviously don't want to outcompete the desert temple or the jungle temple as far as value of loot you can get theoretically kind of early. But now let's try something a little bit harder. Let's move this focusing mirror down here so that we can get it redirected over here. And then we can build up another tower like this so that this mirror can go into this ancient aperture. And again, we get mostly leather and pumpkins. So nothing too powerful, but if you were to go around to the entire temple and change all of these ancient apertures like on that wall or in here on these walls, then you might end up with a pretty good haul. But of course, it's going to take some work and potentially a little bit of puzzle solving to figure out how to get the ray of light over there. The structure piece variants are working pretty well, as is the ancient aperture, of course, but if you ask me, these temples look a little bit too nice, a little bit too complete. So I think I would like to add some more piece variants, particularly for these towers, but really for all the pieces that look a little bit more ruined or even so far as demolished. Okay, this might look a little messy, but trust me, it's not actually that bad. Let's break it down one piece at a time. The entry tower now has, as I mentioned, a ruined and a demolished variant that are both just at different states of decay. The ruined variant has just a little bit of this top section missing, the chest is still there, and then we have a few extra bits, some damage down here towards the front of the facade, and some holes in the roof. The demolished variant is missing almost the entire tower, barely even any of the scaffolding from the second floor of the ladder here is still there, and most of the roof is gone as well. And of course we still have the overlay pieces for their respective roofs, or what little is left of them. We've got a similar scheme going on for the left and right towers, which are just mirror images of each other. The ruined variants are missing much of the top floor, including the chest, and we've even got some broken windows on the second floor here. Whereas the demolished variant is missing almost the entire second and first floor, no longer has much for the ladder to even go to, and is even missing some of the first floor down here as well, with several windows broken. We don't have ruined variants for either of the chapels. We do for the wall, arches, and expansion variants of the chapel walls, where some of the walls have collapsed outward into the neighboring yard, which I think looks really nice. The arches here, we have some columns that have either collapsed sideways or just lost some of their support beam there. And then the expansion room, of course, has much of the roof caved in, as well as some broken pillars inside. There aren't any demolished variants for the walls, but there are for the roof as well as the rear piece here, along with ruined pieces. I'll go ahead and test these out in the other flat world in a moment, but before I do, I want to revisit my ancient aperture design philosophy. You see, the idea was when you unlocked an ancient aperture with a ray of light, it would go into a cooldown, but I hadn't implemented that yet. They just kind of permanently turned off, which of course isn't the idea either at the time or period. Although it's not a specific goal, I do want these Plains temples to have some element of replayability, and the obviously easiest way to do that is through these ancient apertures, the main mechanic. However, I don't know if waiting around for the next day or even several days for these to turn back on is A, very interesting, or B, particularly intuitive. I think it would be even cooler if after you unlock one of these ancient apertures, it changes, so it's no longer activated during the day, but instead at night. Making the ray of light only active around or close to noon is as simple as a predicate check, so if I duplicate that behavior and make a new predicate that checks if it's around or close to midnight, then I can make the particles that appear more silvery and moon-like instead, and have use the focusing mirrors to redirect rays of moonlight instead of sunlight into night mode ancient apertures. I can then use a processor to replace some of the ancient apertures during generation with night mode ancient apertures. So you'll have to come during the day to unlock any of these day mode ancient apertures, which will switch to night mode. And then you can come back that night and go and do the night ones. And we can make this even more relevant by having the day and night mode ancient apertures drop different loot. Let's see if I can put that together, and then we can test that along with the completed Plains temple structure. Okay, Yeah, I wanted to test the Plains Temple generating in an actual world, and this looks so good. Oh my gosh, this is so cool. We happened to get the completed non-ruined entry tower design, but then we got the demolished both left and right towers instead of just one or the other, which ends up creating this really cool appearance. And then we have a demolished roof structure here, the ruined wall and ruined arches over here. This just looks so much more organic and involved with the rest of the world than a completely built, untouched structure. I've gone ahead and implemented the archaeology loot, so most of the loot that you'll dig up from the gravel is ingredients that you can use to craft a focusing mirror. So you can get focusing mirrors relatively easily as long as you're paying attention, and of course you can still find them throughout these temples, as well as rare loot from these suspicious gravel blobs, though looks like we didn't get a whole lot in this particular structure. The same is true for the loot up in these chests. You can find generally the ingredients for ancient apertures, as well as a clock, which I hope will serve as a clue that the time of day is relevant for this structure if you don't happen to find it while the ray of light is visible. The processor appears to be working great. We have the night mode ancient apertures in some of these statues and things, whereas others are still in day mode, so those aren't being affected by the processor. We can go ahead and test one of those real quick and make sure that it switches to night mode correctly. Great, and we get our loot. Looks like we got some honey bottles as well. That is one of the day loot items that you can get now, in addition to the iron and gold and leather that we were getting before. But now, because it's switched to night mode, this ray of light is no longer activating it. We can't do anything with it. It's not on cooldown, it's just not the right time of day. We could even try to do that back one back there, and it wouldn't work at all. But if we go ahead and switch it to midnight, we once again get the more significant beam when it's right around midnight as opposed to approaching midnight, so that again you can really tell that this is the block you're meant to place your focusing mirror on. We still get the raycast ray of light, works the same way, but it's just silvery particles instead. And we can line that up over here and get a little bit of different loot. We get bone blocks, string, golden apples as a rare chance, that's for both day and night, and we also got some TNT, which I think is really cool. Let's go ahead and unlock this one and see what different loot we get from it, and watch as it changes to day. We got quite a lot of loot from that one. That's actually pretty awesome. Looks like we got, again, more string, some gunpowder, that's going to be more common than the TNT. Happened to get several golden apples, as well as a lantern. As we get further from midnight, that ray of light becomes just a little bit more subtle once again, just the same as during the day, and makes the Plains Temple during the nighttime feel really cool. Oh, and you can even see a nighttime ancient aperture there that is exposed to the elements because the tower has just completely been demolished. I'm very happy with the design of this Plains Temple, both with the structure itself, the design of its variants, and the way that it melds with the rest of the world, as well as with the puzzle that we've designed here with the time-based light ray and these focusing mirrors. This isn't an endgame structure by any means, but I'm hopeful that players will find a way to enjoy and experience and explore the Plains Temple in their growing Minecraft world. If you've enjoyed the video, please remember to like and subscribe for more custom structures, world gen, and data pack content. If you'd like to learn to make custom structures yourself, check the link in the description for my very thorough written guide hosted by Datapack Hub. Please consider joining my Patreon to get early access to my projects and participate in these NPC fights at the end of every video. Congratulations to today's winner, Kaio Hiroyuki, and thanks for watching!